Captain Elena Vasquez heard the warning chime before she saw the Vraxel ship. Her crew was already moving, their bodies responding to 73 years of conditioning. By the time the alien vessel pulled alongside her cargo hauler, every human on board was on their knees. Elena hated it. She hated the cold metal pressing against her kneecaps. She hated how her neck ached from bowing her head. Most of all, she hated how natural it had become. Her crew didn't even need orders anymore. They just dropped like trained dogs. The airlock hissed open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Elena kept her eyes on the floor, watching the Vraxel inspector's boots approach. They were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting her own face back at her. She looked tired. She looked defeated. "Cargo manifest," the Vraxel said. His voice came out like gravel scraping against metal. Elena's second officer, Marcus, held up the datapad without raising his head. The Vraxel snatched it away and spent a few minutes scrolling through their shipment records. Medical supplies mostly. Some food. Nothing that would interest an inspector looking for contraband. "Your ship is old," the Vraxel said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Elena replied, keeping her voice flat and neutral. "Human ships are always old. Your people cannot maintain them properly." Elena's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The Vraxel enjoyed these little provocations. Responding would only extend the inspection. The inspector walked between her kneeling crew, his boots stopping inches from faces and hands. "I was young when the war ended," he continued. "I heard stories about how fierce humans were. How you fought without honor, without mercy." He paused. "Looking at you now, I find those stories hard to believe." He kicked the datapad back toward Marcus. It clattered across the floor. "You may continue your route. Try not to fall apart before you reach your destination." The Vraxel left, his laughter echoing behind him. Elena waited until she heard the airlock seal before getting to her feet. Her crew rose silently around her, returning to their stations. Nobody spoke about what had happened. They never did. 3 days later, Elena's ship docked at Unity 7, an orbital station that served as a trading hub between human and Vraxel space. The station was technically neutral ground, but the Vraxel presence was overwhelming. Their ships filled the docking bays. Their officers walked the corridors like they owned everything. Because they did. Own everything. Elena was halfway to the merchant quarter when she heard the scream. She turned to see a human child, maybe 8 years old, standing in the middle of the corridor. A Vraxel officer loomed over him, one of the alien's forearms raised to strike. "On your knees, human spawn!" The child was frozen in fear. Elena watched. The boy's mother dropped to her knees nearby, her face twisted in helpless terror. The Vraxel's hand came down hard, striking the child across the face. The boy fell, blood streaming from his nose. "When a Vraxel approaches, you kneel," the officer snarled. "This is the law." The mother crawled forward, pulling her sobbing child down beside her. Both of them pressed their faces to the floor. The Vraxel officer looked around at the crowd of humans who had all immediately dropped to their knees. He seemed satisfied. Elena was kneeling too. She hadn't even realized she'd done it. The movement was automatic now, burned into her muscles by years of conditioning. She stared at the small pool of blood forming under the child's face and felt something crack inside her chest. That evening, Elena sat in a bar in the human quarter, nursing a drink she couldn't taste. Marcus found her there. Her old friend and second officer slid into the seat across from her. "You heard about the kid?" he asked quietly. "I saw it happen." Marcus nodded slowly. "It's getting worse. The Vraxel are getting bolder. They've always been bold, Marcus. We're the ones who got weaker. We're not weak. We're following the treaty." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really believe that? You think the treaty is why we kneel?" "It's why the war ended. The war ended because we surrendered. The kneeling is just their way of reminding us we lost. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. There are others who think like you. People who remember what we were before. Alana's eyes sharpened. What are you talking about? I've been monitoring Vraxel communications. Working at their research station gave me access to things. Their military assessments, strategic reports. He pulled out a small data chip and slid it across the table. Elena, they're terrified of us. Of humans? We kneel when they walk by. That's exactly what terrifies them. They never expected us to accept the treaty. The kneeling clause was designed to be so humiliating that we'd reject it and keep fighting. They wanted an excuse to destroy us completely. Elena picked up the chip, turning it over in her fingers. But we accepted. We survived, and in those 73 years, we rebuilt. Not everything, not openly, but enough. The Vraxel know what we're capable of. They studied our industrial capacity during the war. They know that if we ever decided to stand up again, their empire couldn't stop us. Then why don't we stand up? Because everyone's afraid to be first. Elena pocketed the chip. Over the next few weeks, she met others. Former military officers working as cargo haulers. Engineers running repair shops. Scientists teaching at human schools. They called themselves the ones who remember standing. Though they rarely spoke the name aloud, they weren't planning a rebellion. Not yet. They were just remembering. Sharing stories about battles fought before the surrender. Discussing ship designs and weapon systems. Talking about Earth before the Vraxel came, when humans walked through their own cities with their heads held high. The news came through official channels first, then spread like wildfire through the underground networks. The mining colony on Titan had refused to kneel. When a Vraxel trade delegation arrived at the colony, the miners had remained standing. They told the Vraxel to leave. The collective's response was swift. A punitive fleet was already en route to Titan. The message was clear to every human in the galaxy. This is what happens when you forget your place. Elena watched the news feeds in her quarters, Marcus standing beside her. The Vraxel expected the usual human response. Condemnation of the Titan miners. Desperate pleas for mercy. Promises of future compliance. Instead, something else was happening. On stations and colonies across human space, people were gathering in public spaces. They weren't speaking. They weren't protesting. They were just standing and watching the news. Standing and waiting to see what would happen to Titan. Standing and remembering what it felt like. This is it, Marcus said quietly. Whatever happens next, everything changes. Elena thought about the child's blood on the station floor. She thought about 73 years of pressing her face to the ground. She thought about the fear in the Vraxel military reports that Marcus had shown her. Good, she said. I'm tired of kneeling. The Vraxel fleet would reach Titan in 3 days. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if humanity had finally found its spine again. Elena Vasquez downloaded everything she could find about Titan's defenses, its population, its resources. She sent encrypted messages to other members of the Ones, who remember standing. She didn't know if Titan could survive what was coming, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whether Titan fell or stood, humanity was done with kneeling. The war had ended 73 years ago, but something new was beginning. And this time, humans would face it on their feet. The Vraxel fleet arrived at Titan expecting to find terrified miners begging for forgiveness. Instead, Commander Teshva found every orbital mirror pointed at his ships like weapons. The colony's communication channels were silent. Attention, Titan colony, Teshva broadcast. You have violated the treaty. Kneel before Vraxel authority, and your punishment will be light. Resist, and you will be made an example. The response came from a woman's voice, rough and tired. This is Colony Director Sarah Chun. We're done kneeling, Commander. If you want this colony, you'll have to take it. Teshva stared at his display screen in disbelief. You cannot be serious. We have 12 warships. You have mining equipment. Then this should be over quickly, Sarah replied. Either way, we die on our feet. The battle that followed shocked the entire Vraxel fleet. The orbital mirrors, designed to focus sunlight for power generation, became improvised energy weapons. Mining lasers that could cut through kilometers of rock turned on Vraxel fighters. Cargo haulers packed with explosives rammed into capital ships on suicide runs. The miners fought like demons. They used every dirty trick, every desperate tactic, every ounce of creativity that humanity had once been famous for. They booby-trapped supply depots. They hacked Vraxel communications. They sent false surrender signals and ambushed boarding parties. It took the Vraxel fleet 18 hours to capture the colony. They lost 3 ships and over 200 soldiers. When they finally breached the main habitat dome, they found it empty. The miners had evacuated into hardened bunkers, deep beneath Titan's surface. Teshva ordered bombardment of the bunker entrances. It took another 12 hours to break through. When his soldiers finally entered, they found 300 miners armed with mining tools and homemade weapons. The miners charged. The Vraxel won, but at a cost that made Teshva's victory feel hollow. His fleet had been reduced by a quarter fighting civilians. Civilians with mining equipment. He looked at the bodies of miners who had died standing up, weapons in their hands, and felt a cold fear settle in his chest. This was what the war had been like. This was what his people had feared. The footage spread across every human network within hours. The Vraxel tried to control the narrative, showing the destruction and death as a warning. But humans saw something different. They saw the miners fighting back. They saw people who chose death over submission. They saw what humans looked like when they remembered their strength. On Earth, a factory worker stood up when a Vraxel supervisor entered. The supervisor ordered him to kneel. The worker refused. Within an hour, the entire factory was on strike. Within a day, Vraxel overseers were being escorted off the planet by human security forces who had suddenly remembered they outnumbered their alien masters. On Mars, human engineers sabotaged the planetary defense grid and locked out Vraxel access codes. On Europa, human pilots stole a Corvette from the docking bay and jumped to hyperspace before anyone could stop them. On station after station, colony after colony, humans simply stopped kneeling. Elena watched it happen from Unity 7. She saw Vraxel officers walking through the corridors, expecting humans to drop to their knees. Instead, people remained standing. Some looked terrified. Some looked defiant. But they stayed on their feet. The first Vraxel who tried to enforce the kneeling requirement struck a human cargo hauler across the face. The man stumbled but didn't fall. He looked the Vraxel in the eye and said, "No." The Vraxel raised his weapon. Before he could fire, 3 other humans tackled him. Within minutes, fighting had broken out across the station. Elena found herself in the middle of it, a weapon in her hands that she'd taken from a fallen Vraxel guard. She didn't remember picking it up. Her body had just moved. Marcus appeared at her side, his face bloody but grinning. "Station security is with us. They're securing the command center now. How many ships do we have?" "Enough." The ones who remember standing had been preparing for this moment without really believing it would come. Now it was here, and they moved with the precision of people who had never truly forgotten how to fight. Ships that were supposed to be transporting cargo revealed hidden weapon systems. Colonies that seemed helpless activated defense networks they'd built in secret over decades. The Vraxel collective called emergency sessions. Their military command reviewed the situation with growing panic. Uprisings on 47 human colonies. Open warfare on 12 stations. complete loss of control on Earth, Mars, and the major settlements. And worse, the other species under Vraxel control were watching. If humanity could throw off the chains, why couldn't they? HFY received orders to take Unity 7 back by force. He led a battle group to the station, expecting another brutal fight. Instead, he found Elena Vasquez waiting for him with a fleet of human ships. They weren't military vessels. They were cargo haulers, mining ships, passenger transports. But they were armed, and they weren't backing down. "Commander HFY," Elena's voice came over the communication channel. "I'm Captain Elena Vasquez. I'm told you led the attack on Titan." "I enforced the law," HFY replied stiffly. "You murdered civilians for standing up. Now you're here to do it again. You cannot win this fight, Captain. Surrender Unity 7, and I will recommend mercy." Elena laughed. "Mercy? Commander, we're past mercy. We're past treaties. We're past kneeling. You can destroy this station, but there are hundreds more. You can kill us, but there are billions more. And every human who dies standing up creates 10 more who remember what we were. You were our defeated enemy." "No," Elena said quietly. "We were your worst nightmare taking a nap. Thanks for waking us up." The battle for Unity 7 lasted 6 hours. The human fleet fought with desperate ferocity, using tactics that the Vraxel had tried hard to forget. Ramming attacks, false retreats, suicide runs. Every civilian ship that fell took a Vraxel vessel with it. HFY won, but at terrible cost. Half his battle group was destroyed or crippled. Unity 7 was in ruins. And he had gained nothing, because the humans had evacuated everyone before the battle even began. He filed his report knowing how it would be received. The Vraxel Collective was fighting a war across multiple fronts. They didn't have the resources for a full-scale conflict with humanity. The Kneeling Treaty had been their solution to avoid exactly this scenario. But now the treaty was broken, and humanity was remembering what it could do. On his command ship, HFY reviewed the intelligence reports from the original war, the assessments that had been classified for 73 years, the projections that showed what would have happened if the fighting had continued. The Vraxel would have lost. Not quickly, but inevitably. Human industrial capacity was too great. Human adaptability was too dangerous. Human willingness to sacrifice was too absolute. The Kneeling Treaty hadn't been about defeating humanity. It had been about surviving humanity. And now that survival was in doubt, across human space, people were standing. In cities and stations, on colonies and ships, humans looked at each other and remembered what they had forgotten. They weren't a conquered species accepting defeat. They were a sleeping giant that had been rudely awakened. The collective issued demands for negotiation. Human representatives agreed to meet. But when the Vraxel delegation arrived at the neutral station, expecting to dictate terms, they found something they hadn't seen in 73 years. Humans standing upright, looking them in the eye, refusing to bow. And behind those humans, building in shipyards and factories across hundreds of worlds, was the machinery of war that humanity had never truly dismantled. They'd just hidden it, waiting for the day when standing up became more important than staying alive. That day had come. The war hadn't ended 73 years ago. It had just paused. And now humanity was ready to finish it. The negotiation chamber was designed to be neutral ground, located on a small station between human and Vraxel space. Elena Vasquez walked in standing upright, her shoulders back, her head high. Behind her came a dozen other humans, each one a representative of the uprising that had swept across the colonies. Across the chamber sat the Vraxel delegation. Commander HFY was among them, his forearms folded in a posture that Elena had learned meant displeasure. The lead negotiator was an older Vraxel named Kresheval, a veteran of the original war. "You will kneel, Kreshval began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "No," Elena said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. Kreshval's skin changed color, cycling through shades that indicated confusion and anger. "The treaty requires it. The treaty is void. You broke it when you murdered civilians on Titan. We're not here to negotiate terms of submission. We're here to discuss your withdrawal from human space." Kreshval stood up, towering over the table. "You cannot be serious. The collective controls 200 systems. You control barely 100. Your fleet is a fraction of ours. You will lose any war you start." Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Will we? Commander Teshva, would you like to share your assessment?" Teshva shifted uncomfortably. All eyes turned to him. "The captain speaks truth," he said quietly. "Human industrial capacity has recovered beyond our projections. Their shipyards are producing warships. Their colonies are fortified, and their willingness to sacrifice is unchanged from the first war. Then we destroy them completely," Kreshval snapped. "With what fleet?" Teshva asked. "We're fighting wars on 3 other fronts. The Keleth are pushing into our southern territories. The Praxid Hive is raiding our supply lines. And now 6 of our subject species are in open revolt, inspired by humanity's example. We cannot afford a total war with Earth." Elena let that sink in before speaking again. "You made a mistake 73 years ago. You thought making us kneel would break us. Instead, it taught us patience. While we knelt, we rebuilt. While we bowed our heads, we planned. While you thought we were defeated, we were just waiting." "For what?" Kreshval demanded. "For you to give us a reason to stand up. Thank you for that, by the way. The child you had beaten on Unity 7 made an excellent rallying point." The negotiations continued for days, but the outcome was inevitable. The Vraxel offered concessions, territory, resources. Elena rejected each offer. She had one simple demand: complete withdrawal from human space, recognition of human sovereignty, and a mutual defense pact that treated both species as equals. "You asked for equal standing with the Vraxel collective?" Kreshval was incredulous. "You, who knelt before us for 73 years. "We knelt," Elena agreed. "But we're standing now. And you need to decide if you want us standing beside you or standing over your grave." While the negotiations dragged on, the war continued. Human fleets struck at Vraxel supply depots and communication relays. They didn't try to hold territory. They just made occupation of human space impossibly expensive. Every Vraxel garrison required constant resupply. Every patrol suffered losses to human raiders. Every station needed reinforcement. Marcus Chun, now serving as humanity's intelligence coordinator, discovered something crucial in the captured Vraxel databases. The original war hadn't ended because humanity surrendered. It had ended because the Vraxel were losing. The data was clear. 73 years ago, the Vraxel military had run projections showing that continued conflict would result in human ships reaching the Vraxel homeworld within a decade. The Kneeling Treaty had been a desperate attempt to break human will before human industry could overwhelm Vraxel defenses. Marcus released this information on every network, human and alien alike. The effect was explosive. Subject species across the Vraxel collective realized that their masters weren't invincible. They'd been afraid of humanity. They'd tricked humanity into surrendering by making it look like mercy. The revolts intensified. The Keleth launched a major offensive. The Praxid Hive seized 3 core Vraxel systems. And humanity just kept fighting. Not for conquest. Not for revenge. Just for the right to stand up without asking permission. Teshva found himself commanding a defense of a minor colony world when he received a coded message. It was from Elena. She wanted to meet alone at the site of an old battlefield from the First War. He went, knowing it could be a trap. He found her standing on a ridge overlooking a valley filled with the rusted hulks of ships from both sides. The battle had happened 80 years ago, before the treaty, before the kneeling. "My grandfather died here," Elena said without preamble. "Pilot. His ship was shot down in the first wave." "My clutchmate fell here as well," HFY replied. "A gunner. She was 20 years old." They stood in silence, looking at the graveyard below. "We're going to destroy each other," Elena said finally. "Not quickly, not cleanly. But if this keeps going, both our species will bleed until there's nothing left. Then surrender." "No." The word was absolute. "But I have another option. The collective is falling apart. You can't hold your empire together. Your subject species are revolting. Your enemies are circling. You need allies, not subjects. You would ally with us? After everything?" Elena turned to face him. "Not with the collective, with the Vraxel people. Your leadership made a choice 73 years ago to humiliate us instead of respecting us. That choice is destroying your civilization. But it doesn't have to be this way. What are you proposing?" "A real peace, not submission, not domination. Partnership. We have resources. You have technology. We have industrial capacity. You have knowledge. Together, we could stand against your other enemies. Separately, we'll just kill each other until someone else conquers both our species." HFY looked at her for a long moment. "My people will see this as weakness. Your people are dying because of strength. Maybe weakness is what you need." The proposal made its way through human and Vraxel channels. It was controversial. Many humans wanted revenge for 73 years of humiliation. Many Vraxel couldn't accept treating a conquered species as equals. But the alternative was clear to everyone who looked honestly at the strategic situation. The Vraxel collective was collapsing. Humanity was strong enough to defend itself, but not strong enough to defeat the Vraxel without catastrophic losses. And both species had enemies who would happily exploit a prolonged war. The peace conference happened on Earth, in Geneva, in the same building where countless human wars have been ended. The Vraxel delegation arrived to find themselves treated not as conquerors, but as guests. It was uncomfortable for everyone. The treaty took weeks to hammer out. No kneeling, no tribute, no occupation. Instead, mutual defense, trade agreements, technology sharing, and war crimes tribunals for both sides. The Vraxel officers who had abused humans during the occupation would face justice. The human raiders who had killed Vraxel civilians would face justice. Everyone would stand as equals, or everyone would kneel together. When the treaty was signed, Elena found HFY standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "I was thinking about the child," he said. "The one beaten on Unity 7. I saw the footage. I realized that single act of cruelty sparked all of this. It wasn't one act. It was 73 years of acts. That child was just the last one we were willing to tolerate. What happens now?" Elena looked out at the city. "Now we see if we're smart enough to be partners instead of enemies. The galaxy has bigger threats than each other. The Praxid Hive is growing. The Kelith are expansionist. And there are things out in deep space that make both our species look small. You believe we can stand together? I believe we have to. The war ended when we stood back up, Commander. The peace begins when you stand with us." HFY extended one of his arms. Elena took it, the gesture awkward but genuine. Around them, the city lights spread like stars across the darkness, a testament to humanity's refusal to be extinguished. The war had ended 73 years ago with humanity on its knees. It had restarted with humanity on its feet. And now it was ending again, properly this time, with both species standing side by side, not as masters and servants. not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals who had learned the hard way that dignity matters more than victory. 5 years after the treaty, Elena Vasquez returned to Titan. The colony had been rebuilt, stronger than before. Where ruined domes once stood, new structures reached toward the stars. A memorial sat at the center of the main plaza, listing the names of every miner who had died in the uprising. Elena walked through the plaza alone, her footsteps echoing on the polished stone. She stopped at the memorial and ran her fingers over the engraved names. 347 people who had chosen to die standing rather than live kneeling. The first dominoes in a chain reaction that had changed the galaxy. Captain Vasquez? Elena turned to find a young woman approaching, maybe 20 years old. She wore a miner's patch on her jacket and walked with a slight limp. "I'm not a captain anymore," Elena said. "Just Elena. I wanted to thank you. My mother was here during the uprising. Sarah Chan. She was the colony director." Elena felt something catch in her throat. "Sarah. I heard her voice on the recordings. She was brave." "She was terrified," the young woman corrected. "But she stood anyway. She told me that before she died. Said, being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about standing up even when you are scared. Your mother was right." "What's your name?" "Rebecca Chun. I'm working to become a pilot." "Military, probably. Someone has to make sure this never happens again." Elena nodded slowly. "That's good. We need people like you." Rebecca hesitated, then asked, "Was it worth it? All those people who died?" It was a question Elena had asked herself countless times over the past 5 years. "I don't know if I have the right to answer that. I survived. But I think your mother would say yes. Not because dying was good, but because living on your knees isn't really living at all." That's what she said in her last message to me. That she was finally alive again. They stood together at the memorial for a while before Rebecca excused herself to get to work. Elena watched her go, limping but unbowed, and felt something like hope settle in her chest. The galaxy had changed dramatically in 5 years. The Vraxo Collective had fractured into a confederation of independent systems. Some Vraxo worlds had joined the Human Alliance. Others remained independent. The species that had once ruled through fear now existed as equals among the other civilizations. The war crimes tribunals had been painful for everyone. Vraxo officers who had beaten and killed humans faced justice. Human raiders who had killed Vraxo civilians faced justice. The process wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Both species had to confront what they'd done to each other. Marcus Chun had become humanity's ambassador to the Vraxo Confederation. He sent Elena regular updates about the work. Trade was flourishing. Joint military patrols were protecting the borders. Vraxo scientists and human engineers were collaborating on projects that neither species could have managed alone, but there were still tensions. Old hatreds didn't disappear overnight. Some humans would never forgive the kneeling years. Some Vraxo would never accept that they'd lost their empire. Violence still erupted occasionally, usually in bars or at protest rallies. The galaxy was learning that peace was harder than war. Elena received a message from Teshva asking her to meet him on Unity 7. The station had been rebuilt after the battle, bigger than before, serving as the unofficial capital of the Human Vraxo Alliance. She arrived to find it bustling with traffic from a dozen species. Teshva met her at a cafe overlooking the docking bays. He looked older, more tired. Command of the Joint Defense Fleet was wearing on him. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing to greet her. The gesture of standing was still new for Vraxel meeting humans, and occasionally awkward. But he managed it with dignity. He said it was important. The Praxid Hive is moving into contested space. Intelligence suggests they're preparing a major offensive. We need to coordinate our response. Elena listened as Teshva laid out the strategic situation. The Praxid were a hive species, relentless and expanding. They didn't negotiate. They just consumed. The alliance between humans and Vraxel was about to face its first real test. "How many ships can we commit?" she asked. 30 human vessels, 20 Vraxel. And we have commitments from 3 other species for another 15. Against how many Praxid? At least 100. Possibly more. Elena whistled softly. "Those are bad odds." "They are," Teshva agreed. "But we've faced bad odds before. Both of us. That we have." Elena studied the tactical displays. "We can't meet them head on. We'll need to use the asteroids in Sector 7 as cover. Hit and run tactics. Make them chase us into prepared positions. Human tactics." "Winning tactics," Elena corrected. "You Vraxel were too proud to fight dirty during the First War. Cost you a lot of ships." Teshva made a gesture that Elena had learned was the Vraxel equivalent of a smile. "We have learned much from humans, including the value of survival over honor. They spent hours planning the defense." It reminded Elena of the old days, preparing for battles against impossible odds. But this time, she was planning with the enemy from the First War. Times had changed. As she was leaving, Teshva called out to her. "Elena, I wanted to ask you something. Do you ever regret it? The uprising? So many died." Elena thought about Rebecca Chun with her limp and her dreams of being a pilot. She thought about the memorial on Titan. She thought about 73 years of kneeling. Every day, she admitted, "But I regret the kneeling more. At least the people who died in the uprising died as themselves. That's more than anyone got during the occupation." "I regret it too," Teshva said quietly. "The kneeling requirement. It was my people's greatest mistake. We thought it would keep you weak. Instead, it made you desperate. And desperate humans are the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Is that a compliment?" "It is an observation, and a warning that I give to all species who underestimate humanity. You are stronger when standing than any force can make you when kneeling." The battle against the Praxid came 3 weeks later. The joint human Vraxel fleet met the Hive Swarm in the contested sector. It was brutal. Ships burned. People died. But the tactics worked. The Alliance fleet drew the Praxid into the asteroid field and tore them apart with ambush and crossfire. They won, but barely. 35 ships went in. 22 came out. But they'd stopped the Praxid advance and proven that the Alliance could work under fire. In the aftermath, Elena found herself on a damaged ship with a mixed human and Vraxel crew. They were making repairs while waiting for rescue. She watched a human engineer and a Vraxel technician working together to patch a hull breach, their movements coordinated by necessity. "My daughter asked me about the war," the human engineer said as she welded. "The first one. She wants to know if you're really a hero." Elena shook her head. "I'm not a hero. I just got tired of kneeling." "That's what makes you a hero," the Vraxel technician said. "You stood up when it was easier to stay down. We all did. Millions of us. I just got famous for it." The engineer paused in her work. "What do you tell children now? About the Vraxel?" Elena glanced at the Vraxel technician, who was listening intently. "I tell them the truth. That the Vraxel made mistakes. That we made mistakes. That war is easy and peace is hard. And that standing up isn't just about fighting. Sometimes it's about standing together." The technician's skin shifted colors in a way Elena had learned meant gratitude. "Your words honor both our peoples." 3 days later, Elena was back on Earth. She'd been offered a position in the Alliance command structure, but she'd turned it down. She was tired of fighting, tired of war. She wanted to rest. She visited the memorial in Geneva, the one dedicated to all who had died in both the First War and the Uprising. Millions of names from both species. She found her grandfather's name, the pilot who died in that valley so long ago. Next to his name was a Vraxel symbol. She didn't know who it represented, but they died in the same battle. A young Vraxel child approached with her parent. The child pointed at the memorial. Why did the names mix together? The parent, a veteran by the look of the scars, knelt down to the child's level. Because death doesn't care which species we are. And neither should life. Elena smiled at that. It was clumsy philosophy, but it was true. The war had ended when humans stood back up. The peace had begun when both species learned to stand side by side. She walked away from the memorial, feeling lighter than she had in years. The future wasn't certain. There would be more wars, more struggles, more mistakes. But humanity had proven something important. They could kneel for survival if they had to. But they would always eventually stand back up. And now they taught the galaxy something else. That standing together was stronger than standing alone. That dignity mattered. That submission might preserve life, but only defiance preserved the soul. The war ended when humans stood back up. The peace began when everyone else learned to stand with them. And the future, uncertain as it was, belonged to those brave enough to face it on their feet.